Thank you, Professor Kalyanji. Namaste to everybody. Now, in this session, we have three presenters, Dr. Shipra, then Vishnu Bora and Manju, and then Priya Prabhat. So we have 75 minutes. So 20 minutes for each of the presenters, and 5 minutes will be reserved for question answer session. So may I now request Shipra? Shipra, you are there?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, you can unmute and come out with your video also. She is going to speak on role of emotions in Sankhya philosophy. So over to you, Shipra.
Yeah, thank you, sir. A warm good evening to all of you, all the teachers, colleagues, and friends. Very glad to see you all. And I'm Dr. Shipra. I'm going to talk about the role of emotions in Sankhya philosophy. In this paper, I'm going to discuss some of the ideas that how Sankhya philosophy has discussed the nature of emotions while being embodied. When we discuss on the idea of emotions, the very first picture comes to our mind is the embodied being of the body. In this paper, I'm seeking to the way to link the concept of emotions to the materiality of the body. And how does the category of mental phenomena figure within such a relationship? So, Sankhya philosophy has responded to this inquiry. Like, before entering to this discussion, it should be clear that we must differentiate mind and matter, or soul and body, to examine the category of emotions in general. So the starting point of my query is, of course, about where does this emotion lies and lies in Sankhya philosophy. As we know that Sankhya talks about cosmological principles, Prakriti and Purush. So where does this emotion lies in Sankhya Karika or Sankhya philosophy as a whole? So Sankhya philosophy, which shows an alleged dualism between mind consciousness or matter consciousness, and not between mind and body. Regardless of all difficulties, Sankhya philosophy signifies a very different dialectical union between mind and nature as material attributes. So out of this union, creation occurs and transforms into self-awareness. So, out of this new union, creation transforms into self-awareness. We know knowledge of this creation is the ultimate goal of Sankhya Karika, ultimate goal of human life, according to Sankhya Karika. So, discriminative knowledge of Prakriti Purusha, that which are the two independent principles of Sankhya philosophy, on which Sankhya is based, leads one to spiritual freedom. Purusha, who is ever free, is falsely identified itself to the Prakriti in the spiritual freedom. Purusha, who is ever free, is falsely identified itself to the Prakriti in the manifest world, which seeks knowledge to get liberated. And this is how the whole classical Indian tradition, whole classical Indian culture has formulated. It gives importance to the spirit or soul, and body has always been marginalized. Whether it is Vedanta, whether it is Sankhya philosophy, or even in Western philosophy too, body is marginalized everywhere. So emotions are said to be attached with bodily being. So the emotions is also being neglected. Sankhya philosophy, besides giving immense importance to the mental phenomena and material world, never advocates the important role played by emotions in the glorious phenomena of creation. So emotions partake to realize human being about his ultimate goal, that is liberation or Kaivalya, of his being in the world. So Sankhya, in addition, shows emotions and experience as the root cause of pleasure, pain, and indifference, which should be removed. It should be removed according to Sankhya Karika to be liberated from the worldly pleasure and all. And this justification leaves room for the freedom of choice of human being. Like it gives alternative to live with embodied being or to gain liberation. And the justification for this task, justification for this interpretation is the task of my paper or my inquiry. So before entering to the discussion, it must be clear that how this the term emotion comes out. The etymological meaning symbolizes emotions. Same kind of attitude pervades most of our intellectual and religious discourses in Indian tradition. Emotions have been treated as the obstruction in gaining the true knowledge of the self. Mostly, emotion is treated as the obstacle of the way of acquiring liberation. Likewise, in the Middle French, emotion is symbolized with the word isomouvoir, something which moves inside when an emotion arises. And French emotion, according to French language, emotions means the flows of energy from the unconscious to the conscious, or vice versa. It seems plausible then that emotions are in some sense evaluation of things or situation towards which they directed. Then only energy flows. Like Hume says once, like emotions are not only evaluations, they are subject to evaluation. Sankhya philosophy is known for its evaluation and illustration of the world. So authoritative text Sankhya Karika says that by watching the world, one fulfills the first great human purpose by watching the world itself. Karika, in the Sankhya Karika, Karika 21 states that the world, that is Prakriti, as we know it, is said to come forth so that one can see it. The whole cosmology of the Sankhya is about the categorization of cosmic creation into 23 essences or tattvas. Purusha and unmanifest Prakriti, which makes 25 tattvas. Before going a long way in the examination, it is required to know the background of Sankhya philosophy. I'm going to discuss in very short. Sankhya system is acknowledged as one of the oldest systems of thought. Word Sankhya is originated from the word Sankhya, which means discriminative knowledge, or discriminative knowledge is known as Vivekhyati. Discriminative knowledge signifies that Purusha is distinguished from Prakriti, similar to that of Cartesian dualism. Sankhya is also founded on dualism of matter and soul, where Prakriti is material principle, which includes everything that is psycho, physical, mental, except consciousness. Consciousness is said to be Purusha. And discriminative knowledge signifies that Purusha is distinguished from that of Prakriti or matter. Similar to Cartesian dualism, Sankhya says matter is very distinguished from that of soul or mind. But unlike Cartesian dualism, where mind or consciousness are the same and they are sharply distinguished with that of body, Sankhya well adopted the idea of consciousness matter dualism. Before entering into the discussion of Sankhya dualism, we should examine the Descartes' thesis of dualism to give sharp distinction between both these philosophies. Descartes' claim about the certainty of his thought and existence is grounded in his famous dictum, I think, therefore I am. We all know that. By giving this dictum, Descartes established that this I, which is thinking, is an immaterial substance with no bodily element. Again, for Descartes, there are only thoughts which are known prior to understanding of God. That means for Descartes, everything is uncertain except his thoughts. We can deduce by this the uncertainty of the body and certainty of the mind in Descartes' thought. Descartes' dualism thesis is based on his firm belief in the incorporeality of the mind, soul, which is distinct with that of corporeal body. On the other hand, Sankhya Karika maintains the mutual dependence of Prakriti and Purusha, the two very different principles. Prakriti and Purusha, they are interdependent, or Sankhya Karika maintains the mutual dependence of Prakriti and Purusha in each other and quickly asserts the independence of each reality. Prakriti is supposed to move with the supremacy of Purusha, which is written in Karika 21. It describes that, quote unquote, just as an association of blind man with a lame man is beneficial to both for reaching the destination, so to the blind or unintelligent Prakriti and the lame, which is immobile Purusha, through some form of proximity can start evolution. Prakriti creates this manifold world of pleasure and pain. Prakriti during manifestation emits the world from itself. Prakriti simply becomes the world via the transformation or parinam of her three basic qualities, or the gunas. Existence does not choose its essence but transform itself into existent things. These gunas seemingly associated with and at the same time disassociated with the conscious principle, which is Purusha. So these three gunas cannot be regarded as attributes of Purusha. Rather, all mental and physical objects are the result of the combination of gunas. Thus, Sattva, Rajas, and Tamas are the three gunas which are responsible for the emotions or feelings and experience. To investigate the function of emotions in Sankhya philosophy, discussion of guna theory is very much important. So, guna theory is the cornerstone of Sankhya philosophy, which seems to be adopted from the Chandogya Upanishad. It is written there. Chandogya Upanishad declares that the red color of the fire is the color of brilliance, its white color is the color of water, and its black color is the color of the food. The fire loses its fireness, the modification is but a name, and the three colors are the reals. So also is the case with the Vayu, Aditya, and the light. The advocates of Sankhya also explain the universe by Prakriti, which is said to have the three gunas as its constituents, and all the objects other than the self are only particular formulations of the gunas, and hence in reality are not different from these. It is written in the Chandogya Upanishad. Guna theory is the most distinguishing feature of Sankhya philosophy, Sankhya system, which holds that all mental and material objects of the phenomenal world are evolved out of these three gunas, Sattva, Rajas, and Tamas. These three combine together and supposed to be the real creative force of the universe. Sattva is white colored, Rajas is the red color, whereas Tamas is supposed to be black in nature. These three gunas are not the attributes of Prakriti. Rather, Prakriti is made up of three gunas, or Prakriti is said to be Triguna. Although these gunas necessarily have attributes which are described in Karika 12 and 13. I'm not going to discuss on that Karika. So these gunas combine to serve the interest of Purusha. These three cooperate with each other for the highest good, or moksha or kaivalya of the Purusha. In Karika 13, it is described that the collective effort of gunas through the example of lamp. The wick, the oil, and the flame are opposed in nature, but they cooperate with each other for the lamp to be lightened up. Likewise, pleasure, pain, and indifference are juxtaposed in nature, but cooperate with one another in primal nature. In the Sankhya Karika, it is said that although the gunas constituting Prakriti themselves are opposing in characteristics, they are always present together and work together for the common purpose of the experience and emancipate and work to common purpose of the experience and emancipation of Purusha. Each object has the capacity to produce three kinds of feelings in the human being, that is pleasure, pain, and delusion. While these three types of feelings are actually the three gunas, sattva, rajas, and tamas, they are known with these feelings in phenomenal world. Guna theory is an effort to describe the phenomenal world through the manifestation of the evolutes of the Prakriti. While observing Prakriti, earlier to the Sankhya Karika, similar illustration is also determined in Upanishads, Mahabharata, and Gita. Significantly, Sankhya does not teach the essential division between essence and existence. Yet it can be deduced that there is a central concern about human struggle with existence. There are somehow teachings of freedom of choice. It is known that Sankhya avoids any essentialist appeal to the to spirit. It also rejects any kind of transcendental consciousness. Unlike traditional Indic conception of religious world, where we find a construction of duplicated worlds, one religious, one imaginary, and the other real or gross. Sankhya teaches the reality of material or phenomenal world. Our phenomenal consciousness, as well as its object, is due to the functioning of these three gunas, which are the sole productive forces of the universe. Here, consciousness is not equated with the mind. Mind is something material. It is one of the evolutes of the manifested Prakriti. Sankhya signifies a very different dialectical union between mind and nature. Out of this union, Sankhya theorizes transformation of self-awareness. So, however, this dualism is neither ordinary nor it is based on corporeality. Rather, it is based on cosmological principle. The Sankhya thesis we should agree upon is the union of self-knowledge. Further, Sankhya theory overtly confirms the creation proceeds from the union of this matter and soul. We have discussed earlier about the gunas and the object created on them. Gunas are thus feeling substances. So by examining Sankhya Karika, it can be stated that each object of cognition is made up of these three gunas or three different feelings. These feelings are the developed form of disturbance caused by Purusha in the equilibrium state of Prakriti. This transformation is visible as the transformation of intellect, ego, mind, and senses. And if we talk about human essences, which are supposed to transform through the creation, to this creation, Sankhya teaches that the constituents of the matter is informed by the social emotions. That means these three gunas, sattva, rajas, and tamas, are said to be different feelings: pleasure, pain, and delusion or indifference. So, Sankhya philosophy does not recognize any bifurcation between thought and matter. Thought and matter are two intellectual processes of the same region, that is phenomenal world. Thus, observation of emotions and feelings can be directly observed in our everyday life. We can say correspondence between inner and outer world has been satisfactorily explained by the Sankhya philosophers. So it announces loudly that there is no other world, there is no imaginary or mithya world. World is simply made up of tattvas, which are material. to examine
Shipra,
emotion. Yes.
Shipra, you have only 1 minute left now. So
Okay. So I'm
I
just,
think you have
yeah.
done the substantive thing. So if you can just summarize.
Okay, sir. So Sankhya Karika accepts Prakriti as the primary source. We all know that. And regarding the conscious nature of mind, stated that the mind is conscious, as consciousness is the attribute of spirit. I'm going to summarize what are my findings. My finding is like it appears that for Sankhya, liberation is considered to be something mindless, disembodied. Prakriti returns to unproductivity. In the state of gunas lies in equilibrium state, there is no disturbance. So, like Gerard Larson gives the explanation of liberation and isolation in Sankhya Karika and says, it is not Purusha who is bound because he is immobile and unchanging. Since it is not bound, it is not free. Consciousness is all pervading. Those who do not know consciousness say that it is bound and released and transmigrates. It is materiality that binds itself, frees itself, and transmigrates. So, Sankhya, I think Sankhya purposefully holds human body, emotion, mind complex as a domain of bondage and suffering and presents a framework for this, for its suppression of emotions. And this state can be compared to the nothingness of the consciousness of analogical theory. This state is the reversal of dialectical relationship between the Prakriti and Purusha. And coming to the opening lines of the paper, like what is the link between emotions and embodiment? I find that its place in practicing the becoming of nothingness and mental phenomena is categorized as the biggest barrier in gaining salvation. This implies that emotions and cognitions are not opposite to each other, rather, they form two different classes. Being liberated means becoming empty of all body, mind, emotions complex. Consciousness will then becomes a pure consciousness in Sankhya philosophy. So by examining just 2 minutes, just 2 minutes.
Not 2 minutes. Only half a minute is there because
Okay.
you cannot.
Yeah. So
I think the main point you have floated is well taken. It's appreciated. So now you should not unnecessarily go to repetitions. So it's done. Yeah, it's very perfectly done. So let us stop. In the question answer session, we'll come back again. All right.
Okay. Thank you.
So may I now
you.
invite Vishnu and Monju to give their presentations. There are two persons. They have to see how they are going to give the presentation. Meaning and context, Gandhi and Shankaracharya on God and Brahman. So are you there? Vishnu and Monju? Both
Yes,
of
sir.
you or one of, yeah, please. Sorry, Shipra, I'll come back to you again.
Okay, thank you, sir.
Yeah.
Good evening to all of you. I am very thankful to organizing committee 25 Vedanta Congress for giving me the opportunity to present my paper in this great platform. Sir, am I audible, sir? Audible, sir?
Yes, yes, you are audible, you are visible. Go ahead,
yes,
please.
Sir. Thank you, sir.
Please go ahead.
The title of my paper is, our paper is Meaning and Context, Gandhi and Shankaracharya on God and Brahman. So in this paper, we are trying to present Gandhi's concept of God and Brahman in the light of Shankaracharya's Advaita Vedanta. If we overlook the Shankaracharya's Advaita Vedanta, the Shankara interpretation on Brahman is non-dualistic or monism. For him, Brahman is the only reality and the world is unreal. And this unreal world is presented by him, proved by him by his theory of Mayavada. Shankara's concept of Brahman in its twofold aspect and all ideas connected there, which are therefore found to be logically deducible, also from a critical view of ordinary experience. The first aspect is the conception of Ishvara or Saguna Brahma, Brahman endowed with the attribute of omnipotence, and omniscience. Again, as all object varies only to merge in existence of some other form, objects can be conceived as being drawn into their ground, which is existence. God can thus be described as also the destroyer, or that into which the world's objects lose their particular forms. The another aspect of Brahman is Nirguna Brahman. Brahman does not endow any kind of attribute which immerses the idea of God in his transcendental and truly real aspect of Parabrahma, the supreme reality. Above all multiplicity and devoid of all really ascribable attributes, the Nirguna Brahma or indeterminate absolute. According to Shankara, the attribute Saguna Brahma, there is no quality attributeless. Nirguna Brahman, there is no quality attributeless, identifiable, and nameless. We can only know him by negation and negation, or other word neti neti, or in Shankara words, what is we call neti neti. Shankara believes only in Brahman. For him, Brahman is the only reality. Shankara explained the world by the concept of Maya. Shankara says that world is illusion. It has not transcendental. It has no transcendental reality. The illusion of the world in place of Brahman is due to ignorance. For Shankara, the world is illusion like that of snake in a rope. The ignorance that is avidya, creating the illusion, not only conceals from our view the real nature of ground of substratum, the rope, but positively distort it, make it appear as something else, the snake. But according to Shankara Brahman, Shankara's Brahman, Maya is the power of create appearance, that is the world. This power does neither affect Brahman nor deceive him. If we look down to the Gandhi's concept of God, his concept of God is in some aspect there is some similarities, and most of the time he is not similar with Shankaracharya. Gandhi developed his concept of God on the basis of his practical and moral philosophy. Gandhi thinks that body of man is endowed by God with abilities to perform divine service. Man may use the body for the purpose of self-realization. But for Gandhi, body and soul are not two ultimate and independent realities. For him, God is the only reality. God is manifested differently as body and soul. Gandhi, no doubt, he's a follower of Advaita Vedanta, which emphasizes that Brahman is the ultimate reality. The body and soul are the finite appearance of the Brahman, but it has real existence. The finite nature of man is not understood due to his ignorance of the real nature. When man removes his ignorance, he realizes his complete identity, but he cannot be strictly regarded as a follower of the Advaita Vedanta, as for Advaita Vedanta to regard that the body and soul is a mere appearance. Like Ramanuja, Gandhi thinks that man's body and soul are not merely appearances of Brahman, but they're partial entities of one ultimate reality. Then the self and the body of man are all real, but though they are finite. Gandhi's concept of God is, if we look, it is derived from the Vaishnava theism. According to Vaishnava theism, God is a concrete person possessed of all spacious qualities and perfections like omnipotence, omniscience, benevolence, and all mercifulness. Liberation could be obtained by the mercy of God, propitiated by devotion of self-surrender. Like Vaishnava theism, Gandhi also conceives God as omniscient and omnipotent being. God is concrete person who perceives every act of human beings. God is the inner voice in all of us. He is the creator of the world. Gandhi believes God is all pervasive reality. Means in everywhere God is exists. Gandhi claims that God is the lawgiver and law. He himself is a lawgiver, and he also a law himself. God himself is both the law and the lawgiver. God and law is not different things or facts, in the sense that an earthly king and his law are different. In a kingdom, we see that the laws of the king is different from the lord or king. But for Gandhi, God and the law is the same. The Almighty is not like us. He's the greatest living force or law in the world. Accordingly, he does not act by caprice, nor does that law admit of any amendment or improvement. His will is fixed and senseless. There is no amendment, there is no sense in his law. Everything is fixed. Everything else sense every second. Everything is sensible, but the law and the God is not sense. Like Advaita Vedanta, Sankara, Gandhi also believes powers of God. Gandhi argued, quote, everything that is a beginning must end. The sun, the moon, the earth must be all perish one day, even though it might be after an incalculable numbers of years. God alone is immortal, imperishable. How can anyone find words to describe him? How can we describe? Like Advaita Sankaracharya also saying that we cannot describe the Brahman. So for Gandhi, we cannot describe this concept of God by our words, limited words. Gandhi believes that God alone knows absolute truth. What is absolute truth is only known by the God. Therefore, Gandhi had often said, truth is God. Gandhi's concept of God has a practical outlook, and it is identified. So Gandhi identified God with truth. Gandhi, for that, Gandhi offers three reasons. Two reasons. First one is truth has a spiritual dimension more than a moral dimension. Truth is a metaphysical category as it is characterized the fundamental nature of reality. Truth is a metaphysical character. So truth is the absolute reality, which is the source of all existence. So according to Gandhi, the truth is God. The truth and God is equivalent. It follows man, a finite being, cannot know the absolute truth. Therefore, Gandhi said that God is all powerful. He can sense the heart of man and bring real peace among them. But here we find a link between Shankara's Mayavada and the Gandhi's concept of truth. Like Shankara says that Shankara Mayavada, Gandhi's truth is not easy to understand its actual meaning. The practicing truth for all people is not possible. We know that Shankaracharya himself said that the Maya is universal, that is, it is indescribable. So to practicing, likewise, the practicing truths for what is Gandhian meaning, truth cannot be practiced in its strict sense. Like for Gandhi, truth is the divine power. A few people can practice it. Shankara Brahman is the only supreme reality, others are illusion. For Shankara, other than Brahman, all are illusion. Like Shankara Brahman, Gandhi also says there is an indefinable mysterious power that pervades everything. I feel it. Though I do not see it, it is this unseen power which makes itself felt and yet defies all proofs, because it is so unlike all that I perceive through my senses. It transcends the senses, but it is possible to reason out the existence of God to a limited extent. Shankara clearly mentioned that the avidya or ignorance is the root cause of Maya. Therefore, to understand Brahman, Brahman's Maya, we need proper knowledge. But without proper knowledge, by understanding, we cannot have the knowledge of Maya. Well, Gandhi also says that truth is knowledge. For Gandhi, realize God, we have need proper path or way which is truth. To realize knowledge, there's a Gandhi's concept of God is the practical concept. So realize God, we follow the path of truth. Without the following truth and non-violence, we cannot understand that God, we cannot feel the God, we cannot find the God. Gandhi stated that if here is truth, there is also is knowledge, which is true. And there is no truth, there can be no true knowledge. That is why the word seed or knowledge is associated with the name of God. And where there is true knowledge, there is always bliss. The Gandhi says where there is truth, there is bliss. And even as truth is eternal, so is the bliss derived from it. Hence, for Gandhi, to know God, which is seat or short seat ananda, existence, consciousness, and bliss, one who combines in himself truth, knowledge, and bliss, then understands the ultimate reality. So, following the path of truth, according to Gandhi, we can understand the what is God, and we can feel the God. This is all about my paper. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Vishnu. It's an excellent presentation, very good. So just think up, is Gandhi a Vedantin now? So you are trying to pave a way for that. Anyway, we'll come to the question answer session. Please stay back. So may I now invite Priya Prabhat, Brahman Jiva relation, a logical description. Priya, you are there?
Yes, sir.
Please join.
A warm good evening to all of you. The topic of my paper is...
Please come with your video, if possible.
Okay. Am I audible? Am I visible?
You are audible, but to me you are not visible.
Okay.
But go ahead, it will come up, yeah? Yes, excellent. Very good. Go ahead, please.
The topic of my paper is Brahman Jiva relation, a logical description. My purpose in this paper is to show the relation between Brahman and Jiva by explaining the very nature of these two, by drawing our attention to the concept of consciousness. I will explain the nature of two. I will conclude by sketching out some of the ways in which I think the picture I will
You are not audible, Priya.
What happened? There is no sound at all.
I think there's some network problem. Can you revive it?
Priya, we can't listen to you. You are not
Yeah,
audible.
actually, I'm calling her. I'm going to telephone her. No way to contact her. Even her telephone is gone.
Maybe we can take some questions for others, and while we wait.
Yeah,
for
I
her.
think I should do it, and then I'll come back to her again if she joins. So I'm just looking into the chat bot. So and this is a question for Dr. Shipra. Dr. Shipra, if
Yes, sir.
loss of thoughts and analytical views may be a sign of becoming, of joining the Brahma, will this phenomenon be just an emotion? So something like this. So
So can you reframe the question, please?
yeah, if the loss of thoughts and analytical views may be the sign of becoming or joining the Brahma, will this phenomenon be just an emotion? So this is a question from Professor Balram Singh. Balram Singh, would you like to highlight your question?
Well, I'm asking that people say emotions, but would that the feeling of becoming Purusha or Brahm is also just an emotion?
Yeah.
Okay.
When
Have
we
you understood?
yes, sir. I think I'm understanding. If we feel we are just a soul, and if we are disembodied soul, and we are not other than Brahman, then we can say this is an emotion. But when we cannot differentiate between Brahman and Atman, then we are living in this mithya world, and then it cannot be an emotion. It's up to us.
Well, this is just definition, but in really feeling, you are the one who is feeling it, whatever you're feeling, right? You are defining it if it is like this, if it is like that, but in reality, you are the one who feels it. You feel like, well, I'm not now connected to anything. That's your feeling. Isn't that just an emotion?
Yes, sir. Yes, that's what I was discussing about. Like Sankhya Karika also made Purusha something other than material beings, and emotions are evolutes of material principle which cannot be accepted at the position of consciousness. But we, in the real world, in the phenomenal world, we accept us because we are thinking about our emotions, our feelings, and all. So yes, all these are emotions.
In fact, may I just add a little thing, Professor Balramji, with your permission?
Yes, please, please,
So
please.
just actually, if you read Bharata Natya Shastra, so he has given profuse, profusely he has quoted Sankhya philosophy that gunas are the substrates of the emotions. Emotions emerge because of the gunas, and emotions are like Brahman and the Sahodara. They are like the brother of the Brahman. So this kind of metaphor has been used to substantiate. And then the number of emotions are there, like stable emotions, asthai bhava, 9 asthai bhavas are there. And then there are asthai bhava, unstable emotions. And then there are Vyabhichari Bhava, like mixed emotions. Almost, I think, 48, 49 emotions he has narrated. And that all has been derived out of the different relationships between the gunas, 3 gunas. They can be related and come out with 48 kinds of emotions in some way or another. It's the basic insight comes from the Sankhya philosophy only. So
yeah, well, my real question was that there will be maybe a 49th one that says, I don't have any gunas. I don't feel any gunas. And that's 49th one, like absent of all the gunas. So would that be just an emotion?
So,
Right.
Super. Have you understood that
Fast
you have access to the emotions, but you do not have access to the gunas, sattva, rajas, and tamas.
Yes, because our personality is made up of that gunas, our whole personality. And because Sankhya is based on that 2 opposite principles, so our emotions,
No.
our
No,
emotions are
Shipra, actually, these gunas, if they are perfectly in their own nature, then there will be no evolution. It's only when heterogeneous developments take place that evolution occurs.
is made up
And
of
emotions also emerge because of the heterogeneity and not because of the essential nature of the sattva. This is the question which Balamji is pointing out, that you do not have the access to the sattva as sattva or dark as a dark. But when dark and sattva, they merge together, or rajas come together, then you find the emergence of the emotions. So yeah, and Prakriti also it starts evolving.
Yes, and these 3 gunas, when they are in equilibrium, there is no emotions, and they are disturbed by that Purusha, and Purusha is mind. So
It's very interesting, very fascinating topic. What I'm saying is, so all of that is really described by us, and which is again, we have full of gunas. That's only we are describing. Just like you're saying, that's only we have a personality, whatever that is. But the rest of it is just our conjecture. That if you don't have this, then you would be like that. And how do we know? We have really never been there. And if we have been there, then we are describing based on gunas.
yes, sir.
So emotion, another way to look at this, Dr. Shipra, is if we look at the Panch Sariras.
Yeah.
Panch Sariras. You have Sukshma Sariras and you have the Sthula Sariras. In Sukshma Sarira, you have emotional, mental, and spiritual. And so spiritual is Atma.
There is a problem.
Spiritual is Atma, and then the mental is the one where we think about all these things at time, and emotion is before that. So either you go before or after. Your thoughts are the one which are playing a role. So maybe you never go to the Atma and you just say
Are you
emotional.
able to join us or not?
So that may be
You are ready?
that may be the question that I'm asking. How do we know? Are we on this side of the thought process, on the other side of the thought process?
I'm just thinking, but it's very nice question, and I should read more for that.
Yeah, it's like somebody who gets drunk and then doesn't feel anything, versus somebody becomes very samadhi, doesn't think anything. But how do we know somebody is drunk and not thinking anything versus somebody who has really reached the samadhi? We don't know the difference.
Yes.
Even though we know how to argue that somebody is drunk, is not really not ecstatic, it's just drunk. But somebody is ecstatic, maybe exactly the same feeling, and we have no idea to know. And so
I think
like
Priya is likely to join. Priya,
okay,
please join.
Great.
Yes. So thank you so much, sir. Thank you so much.
So Priya, please join. Oh God.
She said yes, she joined. So
Thank you, Balram sir. I
Sure.
will.
No. Wonderful. Please think about it, and then maybe sometimes we can discuss more.
Yes, sir. Sure. Thank you.
So I don't know what has gone wrong with her.
Okay, so but that was the last speaker, right?
Yeah, she is the last speaker, and she said she is ready with 2 laptops and all that stuff, but she is no longer there. And so far as Vishnu's paper is concerned, there is no question, but his thoughts are very provoking kind of a thing. You know, bringing up God at par with Brahman, which Vedantis will not accept. Or if you bring the Brahman at par with God, that Gandhi will not accept. So,
Well,
Vishnu, how do you
yeah.
go about it?
Well, is that I want to just maybe attach a question, maybe he can address that also. Is the truth the way rather than it? Is the truth the way? Because Gandhi made it more humanistic, because you can follow the truth. But he to call it that is the ultimate may not be, that may be just the way. That's just addition to what Professor Harpreet Singh said.
Hello, sir. Hello, sir.
Vishnu, you can speak. You can come out with video. Good.
Yes,
Go
sir.
ahead.
Yes, sir. Sir, actually, what Balaram sir is saying, actually, can you please say again, sir?
What I'm saying is Gandhi is saying that the truth is the ultimate, because that's something, truth is the one which is the God. But God may be something else, truth might be the way, it's just through truth, you can follow the path, and you can maybe even realize what God might be if you know it enough. But God may be more than just the truth, which maybe then what Shankaracharya is saying will also encompass.
Sir, actually, in his first writing, Mahatma Gandhi says that God is truth, but God and in his saying, God is lower than truth. In later writing, truth and God is equivalent. Because Mahatma Gandhi's concept of God is from the practical point of view, and it is not God what we think in religious thinking or in a religious way. So God and truth is similar. It is not the way through truth we can understand the God. He says very interesting thing. I think he says that truth is what is truth is spiritual. Like God, truth is also spiritual. It is also metaphysical, and truth is absolute reality. So God and truth is same, sir. Through truth, following the path of truth, we can understand that God, and we can feel the God. We can
Vishnu, please hold on. Vishnu, please
Okay,
hold on. Now Priya has joined, and she has very few minutes left. So let her finish, then we'll come back to you again. Yeah, the time is there.
Sir. Thank you, sir.
So now Priya, you go ahead. Your face is not visible, only the fan and the door perhaps, but you can add, yes. Now please finish your paper first. Go ahead, Priya. Start.
In progress.
Am I visible?
You are visible, you are audible, you are fantastic. Go ahead. Start, Priya. Yes, go ahead, Priya. Is not audible. You don't hear us? I think we are helpless. So, Balramji, what do you suggest? Sukalyanji?
I think if she can be on the phone, she can just speak on the phone. Not worry about this.
But
If she can.
but how can we listen to her?
But
So,
she
because
speaks on the phone. When you were talking on the phone, you can put it on the speaker.
And now I'm audible, sir.
yes,
Hello?
yes, you are audible.
Okay. So the topic of my paper is Brahman Jiva relation, a logical description. My purpose in this paper is to show the relation between Brahman and Jiva by explaining the very nature of these two. By drawing our attention to the concept of consciousness, I will explain the nature of two. I will conclude by sketching out some of the ways in which I think the picture I will be painting can help in understanding Brahman Jiva relation, puzzling characteristics. At the end, I will discuss importance of Advaita philosophy. Sankara has certainly been inspired by Gaudapad, his Param Guru, and the traditional method invoked by him. Sankara makes use of that method. The method is known as Adhyaropa, projection, and Apavada, refutation. This is known to Vedantins even before Gaudapad. Mandan Mishra in Vimal Siddhi has referred to this method. Adhyaropa is a natural propensity of man to formulate a view of that which is observed. It precedes observation because observation is not possible without Adhyaropa. Sankara calls it by the name of Adhyasa and explains it in terms of being natural, beginningless, and firmly established in common sense. What is Sankara's prime interest in philosophy? Though Sankara isn't a Brahmavadi, he is primarily interested in Jiva, its existential problems, and of the worldly life. Lok Vyavahar. It is to find out what human being is, what it thinks and experiences as an agent of action involved in the day-to-day life and activity. While concluding, I will give a brief explanation of 4 Mahavakyas, which talk about the unity and oneness of Atman, Jiva, and Brahman. Note that Jiva and Atman are used interchangeably. This I is associated with
You are not audible again, Priya. I think there are a lot of problems. Priya, you are not audible.
Yeah, I think it will be difficult. So we should go ahead with the next.
So then the next is the next session, in fact, at 8:10. No, 8:15.
If we could
8:15.
let Vishnu complete his answer.
Yes, that's the better idea. Vishnu, can you come back and complete your answer about Gandhi and Shankaracharya?
Yes, sir. Yes.
Yeah.
So what I was saying, and Sukalyan sir also saying that Gandhi's truth is the way and the goal or end. So actually, what Gandhi's understanding, I think, about the God is not what the metaphysical thing, only what is we think about in the religious perspective. It is truth through the it is the spiritual thing, it is a metaphysical thing, but through truth, the following the path of truth, we can understand the God. And other hand, the truth is Sat Chit Ananda. This is the nature, essential nature of God. so Gandhi trying to say that truth is the one thing, through truth. Truth, the God is bliss, and God is Sat, existence, and God is God has the qualities of bliss, and combining these three, truth, Sat, Chit, Ananda, consciousness, and bliss, and truth, we can understand the God, or we can have the metaphysical conception of God.
But the basic problem is that if you have a Visishtadvaitin position, then that can be compromised. For Shankara, Brahman and God, these are two different
Yes.
entities, and God doesn't need Brahman doesn't need God.
Yes,
God
sir.
is the, some kind of, which is, a product of the Maya.
Yes, sir.
And finally it can be even rejected also. But
Yes,
in
sir.
Visishtadvaita Ramanuja, he has accepted the reality of it.
Yes,
So
sir.
that's the best.
Yes, sir. Sir, so in this point, sir, I think the Shankara is more similar to the Ramanuja, sir. It is.
Yeah.
He's also saying, sir, but he's saying that we cannot know God by our words, because it is not personal. It is not concrete, sir. It is another aspect, sir. He's not saying that
So-
God is personal, sir.
So thank you, Vishnu. So now it's over to you, Professor Sukalyanji and Balramji, Girishji. So because the other person is not able to join,
Are we going to wait for the other person to quickly finish her
but
presentation?
there is hardly much time left. If you can utilize that time for
Okay.
your session, that will be better.
The
Yes.
next session starts at 8:15. We have 10 minutes.
But Girishji, let's start now if the
Okay.
speakers
Yeah.
are ready. Because
Okay, great.
The presenter Sebastian ji is there. Sebastian was the first one to have joined today. So that will be a fantastic
Great.
idea.
Wonderful. So thank you so much, Sukalyanji, Arpasingji, Balramji, for giving me this opportunity again. And this evening we have two very important papers. Professor Sebastian Valliseri, he's well-known scholar of this area. I was looking at some of his papers and profile. Excellent. And he's very close. He's in Punjab actually, just a stone's throw away from Delhi, not too far away from Delhi. And I was, have you been to JNU earlier?
Yes, sir. I was there for 2 years, 2017 to 19. I was there.
Wonderful. So we'll be hopefully we'll be meeting again and again. So great to have you. So he'll be speaking on ethical apophysis in the principle of omniscience, philosophical narrative, and we have another speaker, Rajashri Roy. Rajashri, are you there? Rajashri, I don't hear her. Oh, you're there. Okay, great. So Rajashri, she'll be speaking later on the role of dharma in yoga and exploration. So we'll start with Professor Valliseri. He can make his presentation. And how much time? We'll have about half an hour or so, I guess, to make the presentation. Yes. Please go ahead.
Thank
sir.
you. Thank you. Shall I start now?
Yeah, please go ahead.
Yeah. My paper is purported to examine the revival of an ancient theological practice of negation or apophasis, which has taken a philosophical comeback in contemporary, contemporary philosophy. One of the reasons which I can talk about is the revival, because I should say, this theological philosophy and its ethical implications, I believe, is not particularly intended to be theological and ethical in spirit. Maybe a reason for this assumption, I would say, is based on the conviction of the human subject that it cannot effectively explain away the sublimity of the ultimate or the transcendent in a positive way. Therefore, it is presumed that apophasis is not the only way. Apophasis is the only way through which certain extremely meaningful phenomena, such as the transcendent or the absolute reality, or the Buddhist concept of Shunyata, and the Upanishadic concept of Brahman, etc., can be articulated. For example, we have seen that in the last century, or the last century is fascinated with the non-theological, as it is in the case of Derrida, and marginally theological but ethical, as the case with Levinas, Emmanuel Levinas, a comeback of apophasis in continental philosophy. It is also comprehensible that the apophatic manner of speaking about the ultimate reality, which is variously called God of the Christians, Shunyata of the Buddhists, Brahman in the Upanishads, or Levinasian other, is a privileged style of speech that is seen in the works of saints and prophets. I can see this apophatic tradition in the Indian school of Advaita metaphysics, which sustains and is inspired by the Upanishadic wisdom. What I am trying to articulate or expound in this paper is an inquiry into the possibility of understanding an ethical apophasis in the principal Upanishads, especially, and that too, I mean, trying to postulate an apophatic object, which is named Brahman. One of the fantasies of the modern philosophy is the audaciousness that everything meaningful can be articulated unambiguously through human language. Pre-modern thinkers came upon the difficulty of expressing the ultimate reality, such as God, Brahman, Shunyata, etc., which different religions use in their everyday discourse through the human language and the speech. Postmodern thinkers, on the other hand, reinvented the apophatic manner of speaking for a variety of purposes other than the speech about God. Thus, Martin Heidegger assertively stated that the indispensable nature of language comes to the fore, not in what is said, but in what is left unspoken. Therefore, because language as the house of being and thought is overrun by the same metaphysics, that bewitched essence and thought. If I put it very simply, negative theology is a theological discourse that assumes that our language understood as an empirical human tool to convey reliable knowledge is inadequate to speak about the transcendent reality. As far as the West is concerned, it is the failure of the rational cataphatic discourse to express the sublimity of divinity after the age of Plato and Aristotle that the apophatic discourse of the ancient times came to be associated with a specifically demarcated, theological method. As a method of expression, what derives apophatic discourse is the suspicion that the prime element, which is the most significant in our discourses, somehow goes unsaid. Therefore, if at all one wants to speak about the ultimate reality, the best way to do is to say what it is not. Thus for Christianity, the supreme reality, God the Father, God the Son, and God the Holy Spirit, cannot be always through language. As for the Buddhist, the ultimate reality, the nature of reality is Shunyata. For the Advaitins, Brahman is Anirvachaniya. It means that objects of illusions are neither real nor real and unreal. So that's it. It is different from both existence and non-existence. So that's it, Vilakshana. It does not exist because it is sublated or contradicted. It cannot be both real and unreal because it is a contradiction in terms to speak of a thing as both real and unreal. This illusion is inexplicable, so to say, unvajanic. The apophatic method, or the negative way of speaking about the ultimate reality, is an answer to the limits of speaking of anything that resists conceptuality and clear expression in language, including the ultimate. Therefore, thus, we read in Taittiriya Upanishad the following, that one who knows the joy of Brahman, from which speech, along with the mind, turns back without winning it. He is never afraid. Mind and speech are powerless concerning the question of speaking about Brahman, which is said to be the undifferentiated and unmodified consciousness. The question is as to how the human subject would speak about the ultimate reality, so to say, the transcendent. The answer is manifold. One of the answers is by adhering to the means of negation. For example, we read in Kena Upanishad the following: it is conceived of by him by whom it is not conceived of. He by whom it is conceived of knows it not. It is not understood by those who say they understand it not. The Upanishadic view that knowledge of the self can be evoked only by designating what it is not, neti neti, corresponds to the idea that the ultimate is not accessible to the to ordinary forms of experiences and their linguistic equivalents. Negative statements are needed not only for the description of the ultimate reality, but also for an apprehension, submission, and evaluation of that self. In the Indian tradition, this grasping of the transcendent is possible by two techniques: the Nedi Nedi technique, which was advocated by Yajnavalkya in the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad, and the Iti Iti technique, which was expounded by Uddalaka Aruni in the Chandogya Upanishad. According to the former, which is characteristic of the orthodox Vedic tradition, is found in the very basis of the acosmic ontology of Vedanta, and implies that not this negates absolutely everything except Brahman. A thorough growing direction of the empirical determinations of Brahman, indicates the profound idea that the most insightful explication of Brahman as eternal purity is independent of matter, spirit, and freedom. As for the Tattvamasi technique, it is ascribed to the legendary seer of Chandogya Upanishad, the alleged founder of Indian materialism, Uddalaka Aruni. This technique is based on the reduction of the empirical material. In contradistinction to the Nedi Nedi technique, Tattvamasi technique does not negate the entities, but analyzes them to expose their essential affinity, which is the primordial being. In other words, the Tattvamasi technique is identification with the primordial being, the transcendent. In brief, I would say the best way to express the ultimate is the apophatic way, that is, what it is not. Thus, we read in the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad the following: O Gargi, Brahmanas call the imperishable Akshara. It is not coarse, not fine, not short, not glowing like fire, not adhesive like water, without shadow, without stickiness, intangible, odorless.
ठीक है, हाँ जी, ठीक है,
तो उसमें मैं आपको लेके आ जाऊंगा।
ठीक है, जैसा आप
Somebody is disturbing, sir, I think. Who is that? Odorless, tasteless, without ear, without voice, without mind, without energy, without mouth. It consumes nothing soever. No one soever consumes it. The negative theologian approaches the object of inquiry negatively, abstractly, and privatively. What negation aims at more prominently is the difference and otherness of a notion rather than opposition and contradiction. If we say God is invisible and speak of God in the language of such that alpha privity attributes, we shall be accused of destabilizing the anthropocentric representation of the divine. Invisible does not necessarily mean always not visible. Rather, it could also mean colorless. Instead, Brihadaranyaka Upanishad repeats the Neti Neti like a chant. The symbolic statement, not this, indicates the possibility of something not higher than this. What is significant here, to my mind, is the ethical journey, ethical, I am used here, not in the sense of usual sense of the term, toward the state of realization. Brahman realization is described apophatically by the Upanishad seer. Thus, we read the following: here a father is not a father, a mother is not a mother. The worlds are not the worlds, and the Vedas are not the Vedas. Here a thief is not a thief. A murderer is not a murderer. A Chandala is not a Chandala. A Pavlishka, not a Paulkasha. A monk, not a monk. An ascetic, not an ascetic. There is no following by good, no following by evil. For when he has passed beyond all sorrows of the heart. Again, the same Upanishads, one reads the alphabetic statement of Yajnavalkya that Gargi is what Brahmanas called imperishable, not thick, not thin, not short, not long, without blood, without oilness, without shadow, without darkness, without air, without space, without clinging, without taste, without smell, without an eye, without the ear, without speech, without mind, without light, without breath, without a face, without a measure, without insight, without insight. It is nothing and nobody eats it. The Upanishad continues. The imperishable Gargi is the unseen seer, the unheard hearer, the unthought of thinker, the unknown knower. Other than this, there is no seer. Other than this, there is no hearer. And of course, it goes on like that. So my contention, the contention for the Vedantin is based on the postulation that reality is subject-objectless consciousness, or Brahman, which stands outside all linguistic possibilities. There is neither a sense of the I nor a sense of anything other than the I in Brahman. But in the measure of this apophatic action, there hides the phenomenal knot, the knot of the self, the denial and turning away from the self towards the self as not the other. The Upanishads go on eulogizing and paying homage to objectless consciousness, the peaceful self, the greatest secret, the unthinkable and unimmeasurable, without beginning or end. This view is again expressed by Yajnavalkya to Maitreyi in the Brihad Upanishad in the following way. For where there is duality, there one sees another, there one hears another, there one smells another, there one understands another. Where verily everything has become just one's own self, then whereby and whom would one smell? No, it goes like that. So beautiful. And chapter 2. Okay. And the seventh verse of Mandukya Upanishad is one of the most significant expressions of the indescribable Brahman through the Apopati method that I would assert. Brahman or Turiya is described negatively as, beautifully, I may say, as na anda pratyam. I mean to say, not the consciousness of the internal, so therefore not Taijasa. Na bhagi pratyam, not the consciousness of the objective, external world, therefore not the Vishwa. Na udyada pratyam, not the consciousness of both these worlds together. Na pratyana ghanam, not the mass of consciousness, therefore not the condition of deep sleep. Na pratyam, not simple consciousness as such. Na apratyam, not unconsciousness. Avyavaharam, unrelated. Agrahyam, incomprehensible. Alakshanam, uninferable. Ajintyam, unthinkable. Avyavadesyam, indescribable in words. I mean to say, no, with all things, ajintyam, aprapyam, alakshanam, like that, no. So, following the essential import of the Upanishadic passages, Shankara in his Bhashyas teaches that the meaning of self is concealed with the truth of identity. Even when there is no express declaration of identity, it is implicitly there, according to Shankara. Shankara argues that even the description, not this, nodi, nedi, declares the identity of the self with the self, Jivatman with the Paramatman. This is conceivable because identity is conceptually and formally defined as the total absence of any relations by species, quality, and distinguishing marks. To negate such things is identity. Therefore, Shankara argues the way. The purpose implicit in all cosmogonies, according to Shankara, merely butters the sole purpose of knowing the oneness of the self. Srishtyadi Vakhyana Atmagaitva Dasanatha. Anyway, the identity thesis of Shankara is based on the principle of Brahman or Paramatman as the infinite, plenitude of being. and as the only ground for being to be no longer chained to beings or a particular being. The first step in the overcoming of duality is to let the sense of the self in Atman replacing the sense of the self and universal spirit as separate beings. In this way, the self is apprehended as both the sought after and the seeker. Thus, we read in Shankara's famous statement: as long as the knowledge of the self, which is to be sought after, has not arisen, so long the self is a knower. But the same self will turn out to be the self sought after. These observations obviate the necessity to argue that the truth of self-knowledge can, theoretically speaking, be reached by understanding ordinary consciousness and what it conceals. There are several positive suggestions in the Upanishads themselves, which Shankara picks up. Examples such as analysis of 4 states of consciousness in Mandukya, describing the 5 sheets of matter, life, mind, intellect, and bliss. The direction of progressive self-reflection, like repeatedly looking into the mirror, and analysis of the structures of desires. The last named is particularly interesting for me because self-knowledge is described as the desire to know what is hidden within the inner space within the small lotus flower, which resides in the city of Brahman, Brahmapura, the Purusha, the human subject. Well, so I have how many minutes more? 5 more minutes or 10 more. Prasija? Hello?
Yeah, 5 minutes
Hello?
more, please. 5 minutes more, please.
Yeah. Well, I think I will come to the conclusion side in a way. I think, yeah. Well, so these lines of thinking undergird the idea that the human subject from time immemorial wanted to reach an important otherness in the sense that he or she wanted to transcend his or her empirical consciousness. His or her freedom is expressed in taking various attitudes. We do it in a manner depending on our understanding of ourselves and our existence in the world, because it is the consciousness of the sense and value of life that allows transcendence as the interminable significance that provides meaning to our experiences. Every human subject knows that as a person, he or she deserves eternal life, but she is not, or probably cannot accept to be in that state as he or she is conditioned by time and space. Therefore, we are tempted to argue that transcendence is neither a thing nor an event. It is rather the condition for the possibility of a metaphysical basis for an ethical ought. Now, let me come to the last part of my, because I am leaving maybe some 4 or 5 pages of my paper. So as a conclusion, I would like to say, because I have 4 more minutes, I believe, I would like to conclude this inquiry by pointing out the effective use of apophysicism by postmodern philosophers, wherein they try to articulate the uncertainty, complexity, and indeterminateness of the object of knowledge, whether this object is divine, human, or non-human. In this sense, the postmodern apophatic turn is to be distinguished from traditional apophasis. The celebrated postmodern suspicion of absolute knowledge turns the tables on this modernist confidence established in the meta-narratives of religion, culture, politics, and silence. In the middle of this turn stands the dualities of negation, not particularly theological, but systematically and in a spirit and intent apophatic, the bountiful use of the language of excess. Indeed, research in negative theology has not come to a full circulate. Yet I would say we have seen in the earlier pages, or in my earlier pages, that via negativa method consolidated itself as the spiritual method in the Upanishads. I may also say that this is the same method that we can see in Advaita as well as in the other Western and Eastern religious traditions. The unchanging theme in ethical apophasis today is only the fascination with negation as opposed to affirmation, the assertion of the inadequacy of human language to express what is unbelievably complex for the other, or what is absurdly simple, the Brahman. Such a turn to via negativa in Upanishads could be seen as a development in understanding the nature of reality in its completeness. In brief, I would say that Be a negative language is how we can plunge into the depth of our consciousness, which for the Upanishad seers is the inner grasp and possession of oneself. So that inner grasp of the self is the summum bonum for the Upanishads. Self, as described in the Upanishads, falls in the category of the transsubjective plane. It is transsubjective because it is knowable and it has reference to the knowing subject. Following Shankara, I would like to add that the same knowing subject turns out to be the self sought after, which is devoid of evil and blemish. Let me conclude this journey of ethical apophasis in the Upanishads by affirming that the apophatic method in the Upanishads was able to express the ineffable more subtly. As religion and the spiritual experiences are becoming more and more non-institutional and personal in this century, perhaps I believe the apophatic method can unravel the absurdities of human existence positively and meaningfully, and thus paving way for a new depth in ethical practices. Thank you so much for your patient hearing. Thank you so much. Wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Sebastian Manassery, for nicely presenting the apophatic method in Upanishads and other, comparing it sometimes with the Buddhism also. We'll now open this talk for some questions, quick questions. Do I see? Let me look at the chat. I see there's a comment from Professor Sukhila Secretary.
There is a question by Arup Sharma.
Yeah, I see that. My question is to Sebastian sir, that when we are talking about the absolute reality as neti neti, is it that we should avoid making any statement about it, passing over into silence, since any description of it is not possible?
In fact, see, like with apophasis, we see in the Greek tradition, there are three terms up there. One is apophasis, other one is apheresis, and third one is steresis. One is negation, other one is what to say, so privation. So the thing is that when you talk about God, it's always better to speak. I mean, we can talk from the language side. We can talk about God or the Shunida or the Brahman in a very, apophatic way is the better, is the best way, because instead of asserting, instead of positive way, cataphatic way, if we talk about in a apophatic way, that somehow gives more meaningful. That's why, especially in the Upanishad, especially I should say, see, Brihadaranyaka, Chandogya, Prashna, Isha, Katha, Aitareya, Taittiriya, Svedashvedra, and I should say 13 principal Upanishads I have seen that this is the best way of speaking about Brahman instead of speaking about what to say. I mean, especially I should say, as I talked about earlier, in Mandukya, see, the best way of postulating Brahman is speaking negatively. Na pratnyam, na pratnyam, na, like that. See, so of course he talked about silence. Rather, silence is the best way, rather, because you see, only in silence, one can meaningfully talk about God, or one can meaningfully see God. I believe that. In the early morning hours, if I spend maybe some 30-40 minutes that's 30-40 minutes, of course, that is the time that, that I see, that I can visualize, so-called the transcendent,
Thank you so much, Professor Sebastian Manassery. I don't think there is any other question. I don't see any question posted in the chat box.
That's good. That means, of course, either I have confused the people.
That's a very interesting paper.